Hello, everyone. This is Yusuf from LINBIT, and I have Brian with me, my co-host in this LINCAST. And we have a brilliant talent from LINBIT today. I tried so hard to bring him here. Robert, welcome to
Hi,
our
everyone.
LINCAST monthly. So this month, we have a couple of new releases. We had a webinar series happened, and we renamed one of our tools, and soon I will explain all of them one by one. And let's start with the social updates. We had a great and amazing event, amazing webinar with OpenNebula. We did one before this one, and then we realized that the both companies are suit really, really well each other. Then we decided to do a 2 full day of webinar series with them. And Brian, you did all the hostings on the sessions. So what can you tell us about OpenNebula?
Yeah,
Please.
we went through the gambit of topics, everything from introducing LINSTOR and what it can do with OpenNebula, and then we dove into OpenNebula 6, which was just released recently, and the benefits and features of that. And then we did a customer success story with Procolix. That was one of my favorite ones of the series. I enjoyed that one quite a bit. And then we wrapped it up with Supermicro and a hardware case study of how it all integrates in together.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good time.
Definitely.
I think we'll end up doing another one here in October, I think is when the next one is slated.
With OpenNebula again?
I'm not sure if it'll be OpenNebula. We generally try and find a partner or customer or somebody to highlight or cooperate with us. So I don't know if it'll be an OpenNebula again or if we'll find somebody else. I know that we have done a lot of work with the XPCNG guys recently, and we have a new plugin for LINSTOR on that. So maybe we'll partner with them and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, who knows? Okay, thanks for the update. Now let's jump into the news of our software. Let's start with the LINSTOR, and let me put it my list here so I don't change my direction all the time. All right. So LINSTOR, on LINSTOR side, we have a one release and then two minor release because we found a small bug in the release. The new one is 1.12.2, so you better be sure that you have the latest one. And in the new LINSTOR version, we have a couple of new features. One of them is LINSTOR now automatically sets a common verify algorithm for the DRBD resources that it created. So Brian, Robert, what do you think about this feature? Is it useful for everyone? So what is the intention?
Depends on whether you use DRBD verify or not. Every now and then it's probably a good idea to do that because with verify you can check whether all the blocks on each of the nodes are still the same as on all the other nodes that are replicating and resyncing. So every now and then it makes sense to check whether that's still the case. And for that function to be available, you need to choose one of the algorithms that the Linux kernel provides for these kinds of things. So those are just hash algorithms like SHA, secure hash algorithm, version 1 or version 2. And what's new in LINSTOR is that LINSTOR figures out what all the available algorithms are, and only the ones that are suitable for that kind of task. And then you can choose one. And lots of things have changed in LINSTOR there recently.
Yeah.
So there used to be a file where you could just put in common options for multiple resources. And now LINSTOR got rid of that and just stores those things internally and writes them into the resource configuration files. which is probably a lot better because if you have some problem in a single file that's included everywhere, then all the resources are affected. And on the other hand, if you do it like LINSTOR does it now for each resource and with inheritance, then it only affects one resource. So it's more robust. It's easier to use because you have the algorithms pre-selected. So I think it's a good feature.
Yeah, definitely.
Good update.
It maybe it's not directly reflected to customers' experience, but it's definitely handy on the engine side, right?
Yeah, anytime we can automate tasks to make administration easier, it's always a good thing.
Yeah. You know, today we had a call with a company which I cannot give the name of it, but they're producing the physical hardwares, and right now they are on the way of creating the operation layer of the storage and also the connection side of the storage. So they want to combine it with Kubernetes, obviously, with OpenNebula, OpenShift, and so on. And when they realize that if they can only run a Java in their machine, they can implement LINSTOR into their system, and everything that LINSTOR offers is now available for them. And I guess I hope that you will see that sparkling in the eyes of that the owner of the company. And he said, "Oh my God, this is so cool that we can just dump all the works right now that we are doing, and we can just implement LINSTOR in here, and everything will be fixed." So the automation on the management layer is a really great win for these companies out there, because so many there are not only the big companies out there like NetApp, like HP, IBM. There are also small players in there in the ecosystem. So, and they are lack of obviously a software developers for doing that, because a single feature might take 1.5 years, right? So yeah, LINSTOR is doing easier things. And the more easy, the best. Okay. Another thing that LINSTOR has done recently is now supporting the shared storage pools. And now the LINSTOR can handle multiple nodes having access the same physical storage. How is that handy?
Yeah, exactly for that case, whenever you have multiple nodes that actually use the same storage, but you still need to move resources to one or another node, for example, because some workload that needs the resource migrates to another node, but you can't have DRBD running on both of them at the same time because they are accessing the same storage. So you would have concurrent qualification normally. And now LINSTOR knows that shared storage exists, so it can place the resource on one node or the other node, but they're mutually exclusive. So you can't, for example, by accident, place it on both at the same time because it's a shared storage pool. So you can activate one of them, but not both at the same time. And that's what's new.
Yeah, that's and we are now supporting in a couple of vendors with this feature, and I guess it will be on our newsletters very soon. All right, let's jump into another one. All right, so another feature is so DRBD has a LINSTOR has an auto quorum that is inherited from DRBD, and we reworked on that recently, and now it's in and the feature definition is inherited from resource group or controller. Can you also explain that to us, Robert?
I think the only thing that really changed here is the inheritance itself. So where you can set that property, because that is property controlled in LINSTOR, so you can change it. Normally in LINSTOR hierarchy, you can change it either on the resource definition level or on the resource level or on the resource group level, which is more or less a profile for multiple resources. And probably that feature was not yet inherited that way. So quorum could not be controlled with all these inheritance levels, and now you can. So again, that makes a centralized configuration easier. And you can override it on levels that are closer to the actual resource. So you can have a global value that more or less a default, and then you can override it for certain resources, for example. That's a general idea behind inheritance of properties in LINSTOR. And we are probably going further with that in future releases. So we're trying to change all these inheritance roles so that they are always the same and always the same order, like node first, resource then, something like that, so that it would be easy to remember and would be consistent throughout the entire system. That's the idea. And quorum itself, a lot of thought is going into quorum right now because it's being used more and more.
Yeah.
And there are certain advantages and disadvantages depending on which mode you use, like freeze IO or pass on IO errors to upper layers like a file system. And it depends very much on the exact situation, which one of them makes sense. So any level of control that you can gain in LINSTOR for that is obviously an advantage because you might need to use different modes for different resources and things like that.
Yeah. So I wonder if I would, as a customer of LINBIT, and I would use a LINSTOR's previous versions, and I want to use this new feature, what I should do, and the answer was in the mailing list, which I liked it. So you just have to change the property of each resource with a single command in LINSTOR, and then you should apply this property to its resource group. Obviously, you also need to update your LINSTOR before that, but yeah, to the latest version, right? Yeah, so it's cool. So that's one of the powers of LINSTOR, because it's not sitting in the data plane, so you can easily upgrade your LINSTOR versions, and then you can work on your resources without having any impact on the data, because it's not
correct.
Okay, let's jump into the last news of LINSTOR, which is another feature, which is checking if the storage pool has enough space before running resize. Okay, this is not a feature. This should be a fix, right? Because it should do that in the first place.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we push this stuff out, it's, you know, we just don't think about those cases, and then somebody brings it to our attention and we're like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's a bit more complicated actually, because it depends on what your backend is. If it's fat provisioned, then obviously the sum of all your volumes can't be larger than your volume group because there's no space for it. It's provisioned immediately. But there's also thin provisioning, and the entire idea of thin provisioning is that you can pretend that your volumes are larger than the actual volume group size that you have. So in that case, you know, the free space numbers are more or less guesswork. And but you also don't need it immediately. You can resize to anything you want as long as you don't write to it. Then you'd have to extend. So figuring out how to do that correctly and how to avoid running into low space situations is somewhat complicated, but we're always trying to improve anything we can do in that area, like requesting free space statistics from thin-lib provision storage, because we can't track it ourselves by just summing up volume sizes. You have to ask the backend layer to figure out what the actual size is and the actual free space is.
So are there protections then in LINSTOR that would prevent you, or at least notify you that, hey, you're over provisioning this storage?
Yeah, there are warnings for that.
Okay.
And originally, the way LINSTOR was originally designed, it wouldn't even allow you to over provision that much, but obviously we had to lift that restriction when we introduced thinly provisioned storage, because lots of people went to over provision it, and LINSTOR wouldn't allow that in the early versions. But now normally for fat provision storage, where it's provisioned immediately, it would not allow you to resize or to create volumes that are larger than the actual storage that you have. But for thin provisioning,
it gives you an error right away.
Yep.
Yeah. You're right. So it's all about thin provisioning, obviously.
Yeah, that's a more complicated case. That's
right. You're right. Okay, the last releases, what I checked from the change logs, the LINSTOR is getting more and more attention on the backend storage side. So it's looking more to the visibility, and so it can inform the user more. Okay, so that's it from the LINSTOR side. Actually, we have another news for the LINSTOR, but we will mention it in DRBD. And let's jump into WinDRBD, and then quickly, then we will go into the DRBD's world, which is really big. So we had another release candidate for WinDRBD. It's 1.0.0. Release candidate 11. And it fixes things on the block device interface. So we are now suggesting, if anyone out there is testing WinDRBD because it's not stable, it's release candidate. So change the block device interface to SCSI disk interface, because it's a little bit complicated to handle two of them in our system. So we would just want to go with the SCSI. I guess I'm not too well informed, but that's what I got from the changelog. So Robert, I know you went into WinDRBD world a bit lately. So what can you tell us about WinDRBD? Is this project excites you? I think Brian is really excited about WinDRBD. I know why, but we can tell. And well,
that's right.
April Fool. Yeah, the April Fool's joke that became reality.
That's right. Yeah, I took a look at it, and there was a training again with a customer that I can't disclose, a rather large one, and they're looking towards using the Windows version of DRBD as well. They're already using the Linux version. And it started, as Brian said, as an April Fool's Day joke that there would be a Windows version of DRBD, and a couple of years later, now there it is, because a South Korean company originally started porting it, and then we took over that project. It's a lot different compared to the Linux version. You can sometimes see that it comes from Linux because of some of the configuration options that are still in there that look a little bit Linux-ish, but are still required in Windows, and there's a good reason for that. And there is a lot of development still going on because many things are very different on Windows. For example, backend storage, like for example, you have LVM on Linux and CFS on Linux. And on Windows, you have something completely different. And also block devices, as you know it on Linux, we just have those special files that go def.drbd 1000, 1001, 1002, and stuff like that, major minor number. That's completely different in Windows. And so those are the things that need lots of changes, and where you really need to do things differently in Windows as compared to Linux. And that also affects topics like, for example, resizing. I think there's going to be another patch to that shortly, because those are areas where still a lot of work is going on. Resizing the secondary functionality is a little bit different because of whether or not the resources are available in secondary mode. So on Linux, you can still see them, those block devices. On Windows, the drive letters will disappear, so it hides them completely. It's a little bit different. but still the code base is pretty much the same. So I'd say probably more than 99%. I haven't checked, but there are not a lot of changes. It can easily track all the versions that Linux DRBD gets, and Windows is just a modification of that. So they are kind of in the same tree. Same for utils. Utils completely the same project, same code, just compiles different parts of it.
So
So
what?
yeah, it's interesting. It's surprising that that even works, but it does.
So, so I created the website of the WinDRBD on our page, and while doing that, I had to do this graphic demonstration how it works. And from that and the documentation I got from Johannes, Johannes, right? I said it correct. Johannes,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
From Johannes, it's like an emulation layer that is covering the DRBD for Windows. So that's why what's happening for DRBD can easily be imported into WinDRBD in the future releases. So like it's not a separate product. It's not a separate DRBD, but it's like a porting of DRBD into Windows World with an emulation layer. Did I get it correctly?
Yeah, something like that. As you said, it's kind of a layer around DRBD that more or less pretends that the NT kernel, which Windows is based on, is a Linux kernel. So
Okay.
from the perspective of the DRBD kernel module, or driver as it's called in the Windows world, everything around it looks a lot more like Linux than it would normally on Windows NT. And only some specific parts need to be adjusted so that it plugs into the Windows NT infrastructure, like things like drive letters and volume managers and stuff like that. That obviously needs to be changed as an object manager in NT instead of just block devices in your pseudo file system and stuff like that. So those are the changes, but the hard core of it with all the algorithms and submitting I/O and things like that. That looks just like the Linux software, and then there's kind of an emulation layer around it that turns it from Linux-like things into Windows-like things. So yeah, you got that right.
And the best part of it from that document I have read and talked with Johannes is that you can also use a Linux machine as a replica. So that's the beauty of it, I guess, one of the beauties. So you can use it in Windows, and then you can create another replica in Linux in another location. So it's like a backup to you, or disaster recovery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You should be able to mix completely. You could connect a Linux ARM box to a Windows Intel box, and that one to a Linux Power box and whatnot. So you can mix architecture, you can mix operating systems. All those things should be possible.
Yeah, that was one of the first things we tested when Johannes asked us to try it is, can we replicate a Windows box to a Linux system? And surprisingly enough, it worked. And that was, a year or two ago.
Right, yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. So we will inform a lot more about WinDRBD in the future LINCAST releases, but that's it for now. Let's jump into DRBD. So DRBD has a new release candidate for both our releases, DRBD 9.1 and 9.0 branch. And these two branches has the same changelog. So let's fix the confusion in people's mind again. So we jumped from 9.0 to 9.1 recently, and they are both compatible each other. So what we suggest our 9 users to upgrade to 9.1 as soon as possible, because we will stop introducing new features into 9.0 branch at the end of this year. But right now, as of today, they are both fine and they're both usable for everyone.
I believe the 9.1 branch also has some CPU utilization
Yes.
patches applied to it. So if you're able to max out DRBD and you're running into that, that's something you probably want to look at is upgrading to 9.1. But outside of that, I believe the rest of the code base is the same.
What I remember is at least 15% of increase on the performance side on some cases. So it is good to move to 9.1 as soon as possible. All right, so we have a total of 8 fixes in this release candidate release. And the most important one, which I will tell only, is there was a data corruption possibility if you are using DRBD with a backing disk with a degraded Linux software rate. So DRBD has to have a backing device, and it can be a hardware rate or a plain disk or a software rate or LVM, I don't know, something. And if you're using a software RAID as a backend disk, and if that is degraded somehow, and I think on MD, right? And there might be a possibility of data corruption in DRBD. So we found it in one of our customers' case, and we fixed it immediately and applied it into the new version.
If I remember correctly, it wasn't even just a DVD bug. I think that was even a Linux kernel bug.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So it happens actually not just with DRBD, it can happen with other kinds of software as well. But it happens more often with DRBD because of splitting of I/O requests, which is something that DRBD does more often than other pieces of I/O software. So that's how we probably discovered it before anyone else, but it seems it wasn't even DRBD's fault. So that was just wrong somewhere in the Linux I/O layer. So it's going upstream, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that actually came from a contribution from somebody in our Slack channel. Matt, one of our engineers, had coordinated with this gentleman, and they figured it out. And then, Matt presented it to the developers, and we had a patch, I think, within a week or so. It was definitely an interesting conversation to follow.
That's the power of open source, and that's the power of community, right? People came to you to fix your product for free. That's
sometimes it works, yeah.
Yeah,
it's good when it does.
Yeah. All right. And yeah, we had a new option in this one, which is to help invalidate the DRBD resources if a resync is needed. So the option is -- reset -- bitmap equals no, or you can do it remotely from another node. And I didn't quite understand this option, to be honest. If Brian and Robert can explain to me, I would be glad.
Yeah, that has to do with the verify that we talked about earlier. So you can verify whether all the blocks are still the same. And what that does is it runs a verify over all the blocks, using those hash algorithms that we talked about during the LINSTOR section of this LINCAST. And basically just compares the hashes. If the hashes are not the same, then the content is not the same. So there must be some kind of corruption, and then it marks the blocks so that you can resync and make those blocks the same again, because we're just resyncing either one of those two directions you can choose. And there was another option in DRBD, a command, invalidate or invalidate remote, that you can use to resync, but it would always cause a full sync. It would always resync the entire disk, and that's not what you want. So with online verify, what people normally did is they just disconnected the replication link and reconnected the replication link. And then it would also resync just all the things that are marked in the bitmap, in DRBD's bitmap, that tracks blocks that are not, that do not have the same content because they need to be resynced. And if you just did an online verify, that didn't make a lot of sense to disconnect and reconnect just to get a resync going. So instead of that, there was an option added to invalidate, so that invalidate would not also reset the entire bitmap and full sync the entire disk, but instead just start a resync as if you had just disconnected and reconnected your application link, and just resync those blocks that are already marked for resyncing, which is what verify does. So you can use those two in combination now. That's why we introduced that option there.
Yeah, it certainly makes verifying a little bit more viable, especially when you have large data sets. I mean, historically, if you have a 500 terabyte disk or something, and you run the verify, and there you go, you got a couple blocks out of sync. Now you have to wait, God knows how long for that resync to happen. Whereas
you don't really want a full sync.
Yeah, and hope that it finishes before too much happens.
Yeah.
Whereas
and you might not want to disconnect and reconnect your application link as well, because if you're really clustered, then that will insert the fencing constraint.
Yeah.
Or might even fence a node if you're fencing and Stoneth. You don't want to fence your node, so it gets complicated. It's certainly in those situations, in those complex systems, that feature will be very welcome, I guess, because it makes it so much easier to just resync those few blocks. Makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah. It's a great feature. I mean, yeah. Looks productive. All right. Another productive and great feature from the DRBD side, which we excited too much, is the Prometheus and Grafana integration. So we know that the visibility is really important when it comes to this storage, because you want to know how much IOPS you're generating in general, and you want to know if you had any problem with the cluster. And if you are only relying on the CLI or the integration of your operator, you might not get enough info from the storage cluster. So we know that we had been working on this for some time, and now we released a Grafana dashboard that you can easily find it in Grafana. Just check the LINBIT and it will show you, or check the DRBD in the Grafana dashboard, it will show you. And we have also a Prometheus integration. So with both of these tools, you can get pretty good visibility on your storage clusters. But the thing is, we are still improving it. We are still testing in our HQ and in the USA side. So we are welcoming all the feedback from this. So I'm calling the DRBD users out there. Please use it and let us know what you think about the dashboard.
We can put the link right below the like and subscribe button down there. Yeah. And while you're getting the link, you might as well push those too, right?
Yeah, definitely. All right. So this is the DRBD part, and we have another news from DRBDD that we joked about the name last time. So our developer of DRBDD, Ronald, hear us and changed the naming and to Reactor. Now it's called DRBD Reactor. So for those who don't know what it is doing, Brian, do you want to give the folks what is it doing?
So DRBD has something called DRBD Events 2, which basically dumps all of the events of DRBD to this file. And what DRBD Reactor allows you to do is to respond or react to those events. So it's a framework, and really the sky's the limit as to what you can do with it. So for example, if you know, a resource isn't running or something is not running, you can have DRBD Reactor respond to that and, you know, either migrate resources or, you know, trigger a log file or dump information somewhere.
And
So
the name is great. It's Reactor, right?
Yeah, what's funny about that is Devin Vance from our side. This is the second LINBIT product he's named. A LINSTOR.
What's the first one?
He chimed in on LINSTOR because there was, you know, we were talking about Lin storage. There's all these variants of it, and we landed on LINSTOR, and then Reactor was one that he came up with.
That's just great. That just
he's happy about it.
100%. It fits 100% to the product. It represents it. And so we were using we are still, by the way, using the pacemaker for this purpose normally, but everybody knows that pacemaker is a beast, so it's more than that. But sometimes we only need simple things to for a cluster management. So that's why the DRBD reactor born, and I think it's a great fit for this purpose. Yeah, it's good. Okay, we have a new version, by the way, on the reactor, which is 0.3.0 again, but that requires a new DRBD utils, and the DRBD utils also has a new version, which is 9.17. And the only thing I should mention about DRBD utils new version is now it is supporting the DRBD setup invalidate command, which Robert explained pretty well to me in this LINCAST. So yeah, these are the news from the LINBIT developer side. Do you guys have any news for me, or?
Yeah, I was gonna say we have one of the project leads of the LINSTOR product here. What kind of features are coming, Robert?
That is a good question. Frankly, I don't know exactly. I know we're working on shipping to S3 and back from S3, snapshots, backups, things like that. But that's not exactly new. You probably already told that someone.
Yeah, that's a
and so it might have been in a prior LINCAST. And we are trying to get parts of DRBD and LINSTOR FIPS certified for encryption. So we're working on that, or validated, or whatever you call it. So we're looking into extending it to be FIPS compliant.
Yeah, I think I blocked that memory out.
Right.
It's a process.
Encryption. Right. So looking into that.
And also the GUI is still under development, but it's almost ready, right?
Yeah, I think
didn't get the last one.
The GUI for the
GUI, sorry.
Oh yeah.
GUI. GUI is Turkish. Sorry for that.
GUI.
Yeah,
graphical user interface.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's. I talked to Phil. He projected June/July, but that's a very loose projection. So I mean, it could be Q4 before we actually see anything.
Okay.
Yeah, in LINSTOR itself.
I'm pretty pumped up, by the way, with the GUI. I really like it. I don't know if you guys tested it, but it's really cool. I mean, it's cool.
I've tested the mock-up, so I haven't seen the real thing yet. I've seen the mock-up.
The installation is pretty easy, by the way. It's really easy. You just need to install it into the controller with the 2, 3 commands, and then that's it. You have it.
Maybe when we get maybe the next LINCAST or something, we can do like a live demo of it.
Yeah,
that'd be pretty cool.
Definitely, we can do it. Let's write it into our document.
Yeah, and for LINSTOR itself, there's a very long list that we have. So we always keep our list updated on things that we want to work on and change, and just small things sometimes, or ideas for future versions of LINSTOR. So that exists. It's a very long list of things that could be done, and some of them will be in future versions, and we'll have something more to talk about. It's only limited by developer time, really. So
I
we have no
suggest you
shortage
to
of
hide it.
ideas.
I suggest you to hide it from the sales because they will bug you, you know?
Yeah, as I said, there's no shortage of ideas.
Yeah, hide it, hide that list. Don't show it anyone.
Is that list available on the internet anywhere? I know we post most of our code on GitHub.
I think it's
so-
only on intranet, only internally, so you can find it on our internet platforms, but I think it's not public.
Okay, I was gonna say maybe if we post that on the internet, we can get some help from the community.
On what features they want, yeah,
Yeah,
probably. Yeah. Some
maybe.
of them are probably too technical, but there are also milestone-like features where you say we would like to do that, we would like to have that feature. So those are the interesting ones, and then there are some that are very technical, where just like in this file on this line, we should probably like do this and not do that, and change very technical things to other things like algorithms wise and stuff like that. So I wouldn't probably ask the internet that, because that's just confusing. No one knows what you're talking about. But
We
yeah,
have a guest
feature-wise,
over there. You see that?
What's that?
yeah,
Yeah.
you have a
That's
ghost
my
in
girl.
your office.
That's my girl. So she's coming constantly. I see it because of the glass. I told her not to come here for this LINCAST, but she's showing up constantly,
Just waiting.
just waiting for me. Yeah.
So,
All right. Thanks, folks. It was great. It was great. I really enjoyed this LINCAST. And I think we will do a lot more in the future. Again, thanks, Brian, always helping me, supporting me in this LINCAST episodes. And Robert, we would like to see you more often. Please come to
try.
our LINCAST whenever you have time.
Thanks for the invitation, Yusuf.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're always welcomed.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Robert. Bye-bye.
Thank you too.